Let me tell you something. The United States of America is the most powerful nation on earth.
America entered World War II as just one of the great military powers, but it ended World War II as the dominant force in the world.
America spent $778 billion on defense. That's around 39% of global military spending.
No nation attacks us directly or our allies because they know that's the path to ruin.
Hi everybody, the United States is undoubtedly the most powerful nation in the world, and if you look at the size of the US economy, it is far ahead of the rest of the world. While Japan stands at $4.9 trillion, China stands at $17.7 trillion, but the United States alone is so far ahead that it's bigger than both these economies combined at $22.99 trillion. And the military budget of the United States is so freaking big that their military spending is literally more than the next 9 countries' military budget combined. And most importantly, the American army is so powerful today that they protect more than 65 countries and has 700 bases all across the world. The question is, how on earth did a single country go on to become so powerful? What was their geopolitical strategy that made them so rich while the British Empire failed during the same time? And lastly, what are the study materials to help you understand the meaning of power in the world of geopolitics? This video is brought to you by Vested, but more on this at the end of the video. This is a story that dates way back to 1940s, and by this time, 3 things had happened. Number 1, World War I had happened with all major empires dedicating all of their resources to war. Number 2, in this process, the British Empire's debt shot up from 0.62 billion pounds of debt in 1913 to 7.8 billion pounds in 1930, which is from 25% of its GDP to 130% of its GDP. And just like the British Empire, while all other empires were fighting against each other, the United States did not participate in the war until the fag end and acted as a war merchant rather than a war participant. Now, what does this mean? While all the big empires were busy fighting and dedicating all of their manpower and resources to warfare, the United States used all of its capital and manpower into becoming a major supplier of cotton, wheat, brass, rubber, automobiles, machinery, and thousands of other goods. As a result, the United States experienced one of the greatest economic booms in the world. The total value of US exports grew from just $2.4 billion in 1913 to $6.2 billion in 1917. On top of that, the export of metals, machines and automobiles rose from just $480 million in 1913 to $1.6 billion in 1916. And same was the case with food exports, which climbed from $190 million to $510 million. And same was the case in World War II also. If you look at the charts, while the rest of the nations witnessed steep decline in their per capita GDP, the US actually saw a drastic increase in its per capita, crossing $10,000 per capita. Why? Because again, they acted as war merchants until the Pearl Harbor incident happened. And more importantly, the war was not fought on their soil. So in all, by conducting a business out of 2 of the most expensive wars in world history, the United States made so much money that while every other country's economy was devastated, the US had 75% of the entire world's monetary gold. And if you look at the graph, you'll see that their gold reserves went from just 2,000 tons in 1910 to almost 20,000 tons in 1940. So the question is, does this mean that the US became a superpower because of gold? Well, not really. Along with gold, they deployed some very important strategies with the money that they made, and these strategies actually turned them into a global superpower. So the question is, what exactly were these strategies? Well, if you remember from our China episode, there are 3 elements that makes you a super powerful country. Number 1, how much are the other countries dependent on you for their resources? Number 2, how less dependent are you on other countries for your critical resources? And lastly, in case of a military conflict, what are the alliances that will go to war with you and make you the strongest contender at war? And not so surprisingly, the US excelled at all these attributes. First of all, the US built the most formidable military in the world with the most advanced technology ever seen by mankind. And using this military power, they got the world extremely dependent on their military protection. And you would be shocked to know that Today, the United States has 750 military facilities in 80 nations and territories all across the world. And no other country in human history has had such a dominating presence across the world. And they established this powerful network through 5 ways. The first type of bases they established were in countries like Germany, Japan and Italy because they lost the World War. And the United States over here acted as a protector who would prevent another uprising. So Japan acted as its foothold in Asia, Germany acted as a foothold in Europe, and Italy did the same in Mediterranean Sea. On top of that, the US along with others also established IMF and World Bank facilities by which they could loan money to other countries across the world and have an economic hold over those countries. Secondly, they established military bases in countries like Afghanistan to apparently prevent terrorism. But in reality, they capitalized on these territories to prevent the Soviets and other powers from taking control. And thirdly, like we saw in the Iraq episode, the CIA intelligence had such a strong hold over the potentially rich nations that they could actually overthrow an unfavorable leader and could appoint a leader who would abide by the United States rules. This is the reason why they could overthrow Mohammad Mossadegh, who was about to nationalize the oil industry of Iran, and then could extract billions of dollars worth of oil and sell billions of dollars worth of weapons to the newly established leadership. Fourthly, they protected countries like Taiwan from China to prevent a rival superpower from taking over. In this case, taking over Taiwan would give the control of semiconductor industry to China and even the natural resources that are present in the South China Sea. So this protection of critical points enabled them to prevent the expansion and control of rival powers. And on top of that, from the export standpoint, the US was able to use its richness to lend money to small businesses and enable them to scale up. And this is where the concept of the American dream came up, which basically states that regardless of your age, gender, caste, creed or race, if you have the right capitalistic acumen to do business, the economy of the United States by default will turn you into a legend. And if you see, this actually turned out to be true. The businesses in America prospered so much that America evolved as the biggest exporter of food, beverage, crude oil, civilian aircraft and aircraft engines. And even today, it is the tech hub of the world. This was the first pillar of the American superpower, which was economic leverage outside the US and economic growth inside the US. Then we come to the second point, that is, how much is the US dependent on the world for its resources and how does it mitigate those risks? First of all, like I said, countries like Taiwan and Saudi Arabia get security from the United States. So this dependency that they have is almost like a barter. And if you remember from our dollar superpower episode, why is the US dollar the reserve currency of the world today? Because in 1945, Franklin Roosevelt met with the Saudi king, and in this meeting, while the US guaranteed the security of the Saudis agreed to sell oil in the US dollars. So even today, everybody has US dollars because it could buy you the most valuable commodity of the century, which is oil. Secondly, with its military expansion, the United States has very cleverly established its military bases near some of the most important points in the world map. A classic case of the same are the strategic placements of US military bases near the choke points of the world. And if you remember from our India-China episode, the Indian Ocean is the most important region of the world that has 80% of the world's maritime trade passing through just 3 narrow choke points. These passages are the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, and the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. These points are what we call as choke points. As in, if you choke these points, a major part of the world trade itself will come to a standstill. And if you look at their locations, you will see that the Strait of Hormuz is a strait between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. The Strait of Malacca, as you know, is this place between the Malay Peninsula and the Indian Ocean island of Sumatra. The Bab el-Mandeb is a strait between Yemen on the Arabian Peninsula, Djibouti and Eritrea in the Horn of Africa. This strait connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Eden. And apart from these 3 choke points, we have 4 more, which are the Mozambique Channel, the Suez Canal, the Sunda Strait and the Lombok Strait. And now, if you look at the establishment of American military bases, you will realize that the American bases are literally located very close to each one of these choke points. To establish dominance over the Strait of Hormuz, the US has military bases in Bahrain. To establish dominance over the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and the Suez Canal, the US has a base in Djibouti. And more importantly, it has one of the most important allies in this region in the form of mighty Israel. On top of that, they also have a base in Greece and an air base in Turkey. And to capitalize on the Strait of Malacca, Sunda Strait and the Lombok Strait, the US has a base in Singapore itself. And if you go through the details of the US based locations closely, you will see that US also has a base in Diego Garcia near the Mozambique Channel. This is how the United States keeps the most important trade routes in check so that it can use its military superiority either to block the trade of rivals in case of conflict or use them as strategic locations for protection and war. This is the reason why the world is more dependent on America for defense than the Americans are dependent on the world. And this brings us to the third point, which are the strategic alliances during the times of war. Here's where we saw the rise of NATO in 1949, which had 12 founding members, including Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, UK, and the US. This was majorly to tackle the growing influence of the Soviet Union. And the fundamental condition of NATO is that if any of these countries in NATO gets attacked, all the countries are supposed to deploy their military to protect that particular country. Secondly, they formed the UN, which has 193 member states, and even today, the US is the largest donor to the United Nations. In 2020, it contributed more than $11 billion, which accounted for 20% of its entire annual budget. As a result, the UN somehow very easily imposes sanctions on all those states that the US doesn't like. And lastly, we have the dollarization of the world, which we've already covered in the previous episodes. This is how, by conducting a business out of two of the most expensive wars in world history, by leveraging its resources to establish the most powerful military bases in the world, by using its military resources to tap into the most valuable resources in the world, and by establishing control over the most important choke points of the world, the United States became the greatest power in the history of mankind. And this brings me to the most important part of the episode, and that are the study materials to help you understand the rise of the United States of America better and to help you understand the meaning of power in geopolitics. But before we move on, I want to quickly thank our partners Vested for supporting our content. Now that you know how huge and progressive the US is, what can you do as an investor? You can diversify your investment portfolio to include US companies. And you can do this easily through Vested. Vested gives you access to 1500 plus stocks, ETFs, and a curated basket of stocks called WES. It allows you to do fractional investing, whereby you can buy shares of Apple, Google, or Tesla for as little as $1. The best part is that they follow RBI's LRS scheme and you get the lowest foreign exchange fees with Vested. On top of that, they also use 256-bit encryption and SSL to protect all of the user data. So if this sounds useful to you, download the Vested app using the exclusive link in the description and get $10 in your account to start your investment journey. Moving on, the first thing I'm attaching is a CFR article which will give you the entire history of the US all the way from World War I until now. Read through that and you will understand how did the US actually navigate through these adversities eventually to go on to become an economic superpower. Secondly, I am attaching a Johnny Harris episode that will teach you about the US bases all across the world. And lastly, I am attaching an episode on the geography of the US that makes it one of the most protected lands in the world. All of this will give you a holistic view of how and why did US become a superpower. So go through them and let me know what you think about in the comment section. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.